thrilled with today's guest. He's coming to us from Tel Aviv. Former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Michael Oren. He is the author of 11 books, 3 New York Times bestsellers. His most recent, Israel 2048, The Rejuvenated State. Thanks for being here so much. I really appreciate your time in this very important time for us to be chatting.
Good to be with you, Donnie. Thank you.
On a light note, my favorite quote of yours as I did my homework on you, it was, I don't know why this makes me smile. Fortunately, as Jews, we were never short of excuses for entertaining. Most Jewish holidays, an old joke can be reduced to 9 words. They tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. I just kind of love that. I thought that was just kind of sums it all up, doesn't it?
Not original, I want you to know.
Okay, I thought it was.
It's not original, but it's true. We just celebrated the holiday of Passover, where the Egyptians tried to kill us, and they didn't succeed, and we ate.
So how is the overall the climate in Tel Aviv? How are people feeling? If I walk down the streets of Tel Aviv, what would I be feeling and seeing as I talk to people?
I think what you'd be seeing and what people are feeling are 2 different things. If you go to the marketplaces in Tel Aviv or any of the night spots in Tel Aviv, you see people dancing, people celebrating. It's quite remarkable, the degree of just joy you'll see out displayed on the street. Within people's hearts, however, is a tremendous amount of sadness, of fears, of anger, all mixed together. I was just saying to someone recently that the best thing that has happened to this country since October 7th was the successful interception of 350 Iranian missiles that were heading toward us to destroy us. That's the best thing that's happened to us. So you see, it's a very low bar. We've been in this grueling war since October 7th, the atrocities, the nightmares of October 7th, the continuing nightmares of 133 Israelis who are still in captivity, in horrendous captivity. We don't know how many are alive, in fact, of the 133. Many are dead. A country that is war-weary and extreme. We've had hundreds of thousands of young people called up into the military, the equivalent of about 20 million Americans. It's more Americans than fought in all World War II, Donnie. Okay, to give you an idea of the incredible weight on this society. And then the worst part is the loneliness. The worst part of the loneliness is the world doesn't seem to understand us or stand with us in any way, and is on the contrary. Many parts of that world, particularly in your city, among young people, are condemning us for the most horrendous war crimes, accusing us of genocide and calling for our destruction.
So I'm maybe 30, 40 blocks away from Columbia, and it's abhorrent to see what's going on there. Young people, as you said, chanting from the river to the sea, death to Israel, all the above. And try and explain it as best as you can as a former diplomat, as a humanist. Is this just age-old anti-Semitism? Because we know that Arabs, there's been terrible things that have happened to Arabs, from Assad, from Saddam Hussein, but yet there's no protesting. And here, suddenly, there are these crazy protests. Is this pro-Palestinian, or is this anti-Jew, anti-Israel, or a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both and more. It's clear. I mean, the Palestinians, what can I say? They lucked out with their enemies. Palestinians have massacred Palestinians. Syrians have massacred Palestinians. The Kuwaitis, after the first Gulf War, kicked 400,000 Palestinians out in 24 hours. Nobody says anything. There's a huge civil war going just south of here in the Sudan with tens, potentially hundreds of thousands of casualties. Nobody cares. They only care when Jews are involved, and the Jews are battling Palestinians, and Palestinians then become the ultimate victims. And yes, that's age-old anti-Semitism. You can see behind that the classic anti-Semitic tropes, the murder of the innocents, the blood libels. Every time an American official quotes Hamas figures saying 32,000 have been killed or 34,000 have been killed, statistics numbers are statistically impossible. Matter of fact, just in the last few days, the numbers went from 32 to 34,000, and there's almost no fighting in Gaza.
Why are they statistically impossible?
Because, I'll give you an example. They'll say that 33,000 people have been killed, or 34,000 people, and 78% of them are women and children. That is statistically impossible. It means there's no men in Gaza. Yeah. And you see the way it goes up. It goes up in increments of 1,000 and 2,000, and in a very synchronized way, which is not how wars are fought. You have wars that you have days where you have a lot of casualties, and you have no casualties. As I said before, there have been very few casualties in Gaza in the last 72 hours, but it's gone up well over 1,000. So in that number, though, I'm not finished yet, are the 13 to 14,000 terrorists that Israel has killed. It is the hundreds, potentially maybe thousands of Palestinians killed by Palestinian rockets that fell short, because about 30% of their rockets fall short. And you saw what happened at the Al Ahli hospital incident, where we were blamed for killing 500 Palestinians with a bomb. It turned out it was a Palestinian rocket that fell short, and that was very common. These rockets. And then lastly, that number also includes the Palestinians who just die of natural causes. And in a population of 2.5 million people, over a 7-month period, about 4,000 people will die of natural causes. You deduct all of that from that number, and you have something close to a 1-to-1 combatant to civilian fatality ratio in Gaza, which is an all-time record for any army fighting in an urban environment, certainly a densely populated urban environment. During the United States battles in Iraq and Afghanistan, it was between 4-to-1 and 9-to-1 against civilians. One combatant for every 4 civilians killed, or every 9 combatants killed. It's very extremely difficult fight. Now, keep in mind, from my perspective, every Palestinian civilian death is a tragedy, and one death too many. But to then turn around and accuse us of genocide is statistically impossible and statistically libelous. It's a classic blood libel is what it is. So we're facing all that. So yes, anti-Semitism plays a role, but something much deeper is going on at Columbia. And I say, put my cards on the table. I'm a Columbia alumnus. I've been working with the Jewish graduates of Columbia to respond to some of these charges. And I went to a university many years ago, as you can see, that loved Western civilization, that extolled Western civilization. We studied Western civilization. It was proudly American. And something's happened. Something's happened over these decades where the university no longer knows what it stands for. It really doesn't. Some vague notion of free speech, but it's free speech only if you're speaking up against Israel and Jews. It's not, free speech if you were talking about black people or gay people, or even saying that, there are only 2 genders.
Right.
You'd be in big trouble at Columbia's campus. So much for free speech. And these protests are not just anti-Israel. I don't even know if they're principally pro-anti-Israel.
They're anti-U.S. They're anti-U.S.
They're burning the American flag.
Yeah.
And they're anti that civilization. And then you can go into deeper why this is happening, the role of social media, the role of the breakdown of community and religion in the United States. I think a lot of these young people are just kind of empty inside, and they're getting filled up with something. It must feel really good to get out there and chant and have a sense of community and have a sense of purpose and have a sense of meaning in life. They're chanting from the river to the sea. The vast majority of them have no idea what river
they
they're
don't know what the
talking
fuck
about,
it is.
what they're talking about. And if they looked at the map, they would note that the river to the sea does not include Gaza. The river stops north of Gaza. So it doesn't even apply to the situation in Gaza. That's how ignorant they are. But there's another factor here which we don't talk about, and that is I've made a public call on the Biden administration to instruct the FBI to investigate these demonstrations, because clearly they're being organized and being funded from outside. If you look at the tents, they're all the same tents, the same flags, the meals. Many of the people demonstrating are not students. They're people who have been shipped in. And it's been now documented that when police do intervene and they arrest quote unquote students, it turns out the majority of them are not even students. So what's behind this? And to my mind, I say this humbly, I'm not a citizen of the United States. I don't reside in the United States. But this is a threat to American higher education, but broadly, it's a threat to American society. And it's being led by people who hate the United States. If that's not a role for the FBI, I don't know what is.
There is this, I saw a statistic about young people that 62 or 64% kind of want to blow institutions up in this country. It's one of the reasons Donald Trump is appealing to young people in this. We'll talk politics a little bit later, domestic politics, but what has happened? Why this disenfranchised youth more so than ever before? Is it social media? Is it globalization? Is it the information age? If you? I know you're not a sociologist.
Okay. I'll give you that. I'm an academic, but I'll give you the academic answer, which is all of the above.
Yeah,
it's all of those, and certainly social media. What social media has done has been to exaggerate and accelerate the process. When we were young, there was the anti-Vietnam War protests. They lasted about a decade. Then you had the anti-nuclear power movement, which lasted about a decade. But as you got into this century, the distance between these causes telescoped. So you had climate change for about 3, 4 years. Then you had Me Too for about 2 years. And then you had Black Lives Matter for about 2 years. And so this is the next one. And I don't know how long this one goes out. I don't know how Palestine goes on. But what I do know is that Palestine doesn't mean just Palestine. Palestine means many, many things. It means socialism. It means anti-nationalism. It means anti-Americanism. It means, strange enough, gender equality, which is the last place you're going to find gender equality in Palestine, in Gaza or the West Bank. They'll kill you for being gay. Certainly, being women's rights. Look, in Iraq, they just shot the third female influencer because she was wearing tight pants. Shot and killed the papers today. So it's very bizarre in that way. LGBT rights, be gay in Gaza, see how long you live.
Yeah, I want to stop all the women and yeah.
You'll be
it's just
dead.
amazing. Yeah.
But the whole thing, but what it's about is it's social media has whipped up this frenzy and created a situation where not only is it endowing meaning in these causes and giving people who don't have meaning in their lives something to live for and something to create community around because they have no communities. But it's also inflaming it and endowing it with virtue. So not only can you, for example, hate Israel and hate Jews in an open way and say things that people would have said maybe behind closed doors several decades ago. Not only can you say them publicly now, but you're virtuous because you're valorized for doing this. Which is an extraordinary change.
So the fantasy that many people have, and I don't mean that in a condescending, derogatory way, is a two-state solution. And how do we get there, particularly when I'm going to guess that 80% of Gazans are radicalized at this point? The other side doesn't want that. What's the pathway to there, to this very idealistic world that we live in a peaceful two-state solution? What's the path? I know there's no answer. I'm asking you an unanswerable question.
No, it's not. It's a totally answerable question. Do we have 2 hours? It's this. I've been involved in the peace process since its inception in the early 1990s. I was an advisor to Yitzhak Rabin. I've been involved in just about almost every peace effort since then. I participated in the last round of talks with the Palestinians. And I've come away with some very fundamental conclusions. And that, the Palestinians actually don't want a state. Certainly don't want a state in the West Bank and Gaza. They hold the world record of a people who've been offered a two-state solution that turned it down starting in the 1930s. And every time they turn it down, most times they turn it down with violence. They just don't say no. They say no with a gun. And they have no discussion about what their future state would look like, what kind of institutions it would have. Would it be a democracy? Would it be a secular state, a religious state? The one thing they all agree on is that they're not us. And the denial of our identity and the denial of our state is vital for their identity. And which is why creating a true state solution in which the Palestinian state actually has viable institutions and has sort of democratically elected government and recognizes Israel as the Jewish nation state the way we would recognize Palestine as the Palestinian nation state, it's just not on the table. It's not going to happen. And so by keeping banging our heads on our wall on this two-state solution, we are actually obviating the possibility of other solutions, which could be federated solutions. Seems to me the United States has one. You could have trusteeships. You could have a cantonment system like Switzerland. There are other ways you could proceed, but no one's going to actually explore them. And what I'm telling you now, by the way, there are people high up in the Democratic Party who understand this too, but it's just become an article of faith. It just is. And the tragedy is the tragedy for the Palestinians and for Israelis. Yeah. And now you have a situation where 85% of the Palestinians of the West Bank support Hamas, or support certainly October 7th, don't want a two-state solution. And a majority of Israelis don't want it either, because every place we've ever withdrawn from, whether it be southern Lebanon or Gaza, has turned into a terrorist state. And you're not going to believe this. I look out this window. You can't see it to the right. I'm in Tel Aviv. I see Hebron. I see the West Bank. So you create a Hamas state over there. I'm not going to be in rocket range anymore, Donnie. I'm going to be in rifle range. So I'm going to put a bullet through this window off to my right. And Israelis just aren't going to go for that right now. We make mistakes, but we're not stupid.
Yeah. So where do we go from here? How does this play out?
Well, I think that we should be open to any possibility. I think we should be engaged in a serious, intimate discussion with the Biden administration, with other friends of the world. It doesn't hurt us in any way. It doesn't obligate us in any way to talk. And it's interesting that Secretary of State Blinken keeps on talking about a pathway to a Palestinian state. So, what is a pathway? It's a thing with gravel and shrubs. We can talk. We can talk pathway. It's fine. Okay, let's see what happens. I'm pretty confident that whatever idea we come up with, the Palestinians are going to reject. I haven't seen them accept one yet. And this is going back, 80, 90 years. They haven't accepted one yet. So it's pretty big, pretty convincing track record. By the same token, we should be talking in a serious, intimate way with the administration about the morning after scenario for Gaza, and doing our best in a situation which is not ideal, not just because of the vast complexities of combat in Gaza, and you're dealing with not only a civilian population of well over 1 million people pushed up against the Egyptian border, but beneath them are hundreds of miles of tunnels going down hundreds of feet, and no modern army's ever faced anything remotely like that, where you're fighting basically two wars at the same time, one above the surface and one beneath the surface. Nothing like it. And then you have and I'm going to say something rather harsh here, you have a way in which both Hamas and the White House are using those Palestinians as human shields. Hamas is literally hiding behind them and hoping they get killed, because the more Palestinians who die, the greater the pressure on Israel to give a ceasefire, to agree to a ceasefire, which is what they want. That's how Hamas survives and declare victory. But the administration is also using that population as human shield in order to deter Israel from invading Rafah, and saying the administration will not accept any Israeli plan for evacuating the area. The United States is period opposed to the Rafah.
Is that based on politically how that affects Biden?
It's based, yes, that's true, and it's also I think it's also sort of ingrained. It's a certain moral outlook on the world, but the administration has been indicating in recent weeks that if Israel presented a viable plan for evacuating the civilian population, it would agree to the Israeli military incursion into Rafah. But Tom Friedman, several days ago, published an op-ed and said that's not true, that the Biden administration is actually opposed to the Rafah incursion under any circumstances, which to me means they, like Hamas, are using that population as a shield. I just think, if I had my druthers, and I don't think I'm a right-wing crazy. I may be a little crazy, but not that right-wing. I would say, wouldn't it be great if the United States said to Israel at the beginning of this fight, go in there. We understand this is going to be very costly and complex, but we're going to stick with you to the very end, and we're going to destroy Hamas. And I think by doing that, America would have sent an unequivocal message to its allies in the world that you could depend on the United States. We're there, standing shoulder to shoulder with you. It would have sent an unequivocal message to Russia and China: don't mess with us. And this constant, threading of the needle, on one hand, giving us vital ammunition and arms, casting vetoes in the Security Council in most cases, not all, supporting our right to defend ourselves on one hand, the other hand, basically accusing us of war crimes, and empowering anti-Semitic groups in the United States who say the same thing. Threading that needle all the time ultimately will not benefit the United States either strategically, and though I'm not a huge expert on American politics, I don't think it's going to help the Biden administration electorally either. Yeah. A Harvard poll came out yesterday that said that 80% of Americans support Israel in this battle.
Yeah. What do you say to people who say, well, okay, yes, I understand you want to go into Rafah. There's still battalions of Hamas left. You've got to take them out. But Hamas is an idea. You can't kill it. So what's the alternative? Because I guess I keep calling this a Rubik's Cube, in that if you don't go forward with the offensive, you're still in the same place we were, and you basically have rewarded this behavior. If you do go in, you're still not taking out Hamas. So what's the win?
Okay, the win is this. You destroy Hamas as a serious military force. You deny Hamas's ability to reorganize, regroup, rearm, and mount another strike, which is what suddenly their leaders say they're going to do an infinite number of times until Israel is destroyed. You denied the ability to rule the Gaza Strip again. So you're right, you can't destroy the idea of Hamas. It's basically the same theology as ISIS and Al Qaeda and Hezbollah. But what you can do is deny them a state backer. So ISIS is still a threat, clearly a threat. They mounted this terrorist attack in Moscow a couple of weeks ago, but they're much less a threat because they don't have the caliphate behind them. They don't have the Islamic State behind them. There are neo-Nazis in the world. There are lots of neo-Nazis, but they're a lot less powerful because there's no Nazi Germany behind them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So not having that state behind them is a very big victory. It also opens up the ability to move ahead on diplomatic solutions because there wasn't going to be anything as long as Hamas was ruling over Gaza. So it's very different. It's a very different situation. So certainly it behooves everybody involved, including the Palestinians, to conclude the destruction of Hamas. There's nobody who doesn't benefit for this. Only one who doesn't benefit would be Iran, and which is very good. And so there you have it. There's your answer. Why we have to conclude with it. We'll be dealing with an insurgency. We'll be dealing with Hamas cells in the West Bank and Jerusalem, probably in Europe too. That's the nature of it. The bigger question, if you would, is, and I often get this question. People ask me, "Well, we understand Israel's tactic. We don't understand Israel's strategy." And it's a legitimate question because often our strategy is not very clear, if at all, if we have one. But the overall strategy of Israel since 1948 has been the tactic. And what does that mean? Every couple of years, some of our neighbors are going to get the bright idea that they're going to try to destroy us. And a war of national annihilation is very rare in history. I don't know about your dad. My father fought in World War II and landed on Normandy Beach. And he wasn't fighting to destroy Germany. He just wanted to destroy the Nazis. All right. So wars of national annihilation are very rare in history. We have them, and we've had them since day one. So every couple of years, some of our neighbors are going to get this idea, going to throw us into the sea, and we're going to hit them very hard and try to convince them that this is not a very good idea. And this is going to happen again and again. The Egyptians tried it 4 times. And finally, they concluded, well, you're right. It's not a very good idea. Let's make peace. The Jordanians tried it twice. They concluded it wasn't a good idea. The Gulf Arabs, those who signed the Abraham Accords, all reached that same conclusion. War wasn't the way to go. Now, we haven't convinced everybody. We haven't convinced the Syrians. We haven't convinced most of the Palestinians that's not the way to go. But every once in a while, we're going to have to remind them it's not a good idea. And in the intervals between these conflicts, we develop one of the most advanced societies on the planet Earth, hugely successful by any international parameters. We don't stay in place. They stay in place. They're not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. We move on. And so the strategy is to live another day and to develop this country until such a time as we can finally convince the last of our neighbors that it's not a good idea to try to kill us.
That's really well put. I'm going to kind of frame that because that kind of sums it all up as best as I heard it summed up. How did October 7th happen in the first place? Obviously, we know the military strength. How the fuck does does Netanyahu have culpability in this?
Sure, he does. He hasn't admitted it.
Yeah.
Israel. One of the themes of Israeli society is taking responsibility. I mean, Zionist movement was about taking responsibilities. This was the only place where Jews could take responsibility for themselves as Jews. And after October 7th, the chief of staff, the head of the military intelligence wing, the head of the Mossad, the head of our internal security, the Shabak, the defense minister, all came out and said, I take responsibility. So that's Israeli code for, I screwed up. I'm going to make it better. And after I finish making it better, I'm going to resign. And there's only one person who didn't say those 3 words, I take responsibility, and that was Benjamin Netanyahu. But of course, the buck is going to end there. And he's responsible for a great number of things. He is not responsible for the one major thing that he keeps on getting accosted with and accused of. And that was the policy of paying off Hamas through Qatar. And I listened to my good friend Joe Scarborough ranting about how he just rants about it for how Netanyahu did this. Netanyahu.
Well, what would you say to him? Because this is something he's very passionate about. First of all, I think Joe has been a staunch defender of Israel. I think when you look at great people in the media,
I do a lot of Morning Joe, and I enjoy it. I want him to get me talking about it because he doesn't talk to me about it. He and Mika go around this rant. I got some really bad news for you.
I'm not going to
Barack
let you call.
Obama.
I'm not going to let you tell them they rant. They're my friends, so they go on this point of view.
No,
Let's call it a point of view.
there's no other word for it. They scream for about
Okay.
5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. I don't think it's a negative word, rant. I rant all the time.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Um, they vent. How's that one?
Okay.
And I got really bad news for you. Barack Obama signed off on that policy. Donald Trump signed off on that policy. Joe Biden signed off on that policy.
But this was 3 weeks
Naftali
before.
Bennett signed off on that policy. It wasn't just Bibi. It was successive Israeli governments, American governments, European governments. Everybody signed on to that policy. And it's very handy to blame Netanyahu about it, but it wasn't.
But
And I was in government and I saw it up close. And what was it? It's actually very simple. Hamas wears two hats. It wears a jihadist terrorist hat and it wears a governance hat. It's de facto government of the mini state of Palestine and Gaza. And the assumption was here in Washington, in London, in Paris, and Berlin, that if you paid them enough money, you could incentivize Hamas to wear the governance hat and to shelve the jihadist hat. And we were all wrong. All wrong. 15 years of policy was just wrong. Okay. By the way, it's the same mistake that Obama made with Iran. Thinking
Yeah.
that you could buy off the Iranians. They couldn't be bought off either. It doesn't work in the Middle East, this buying off. And Israel was also aware that the Israeli society was unwilling to pay the price in terms of soldiers' lives of uprooting Hamas. We thought it would cost about 500 soldiers, and Israeli society prior to October 7th was unwilling to do that. But you cannot impute this to Netanyahu only. Yeah, he is culpable too, but he is far, far, far from being the sole.
But there's the fact that it was 3 weeks before, and that $3 billion is going in. It just doesn't smell right.
It doesn't smell right. But again, this would have been done with the full approval of the White House, the full approval of virtually every branch of government. I don't know anybody who really stood up and challenged this assumption. And across the board, I don't know anybody who challenged it and said, hey, maybe these guys don't care about money. Maybe what they care about is killing Jews and destroying the Jewish state more than anything. They don't even care about Palestinians.
You mentioned
one of our big problems is that we're part of a civilization where that thought is so alien.
We put on value.
It's hard for us to wrap our heads around it.
Do you agree? I come from the marketing world, and what I've been saying a lot on Morning Joe and other places is you have to understand these people are as against Western civilization and the U.S. as they are Israel. Israel just happens to be next door. That's the way you sell this to the American people. Say they want you. This is not you could talk to you blue in the face about Jews and Israel and whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's not my problem, whatever it is. You got to start to get people to understand they'll take 1,000 years. But the mission of a jihad is the destruction of Western civilization, period.
We're just a stepping stone. And they're very clear about this. This is why I say that the theology of Hamas is the same as ISIS, is the same as Al-Qaeda, it's the same as the Hezbollah. It's to transform the Middle East into a caliphate, to resurrect the medieval Arab Islamic caliphate, then to expand it beyond the borders of the Middle East to encompass the entire globe. Hamas is only distinct in that it sees the destruction of Israel and its replacement by an Islamic Palestinian state as the first step in that process. That's all. That's the only reason that Hamas is distinguished. And you're right. You're not going to kill the idea. Ending that idea will take generations of a concerted effort to re-educate young people because they're taught from the earliest age, literally before they can walk, that this is the goal, and any means is legitimate to achieve the goal. So it's a huge undertaking. Strangely enough, the person who understood this best were people in the Bush administration, who developed a program called MEPI, the Middle East Peace Initiative, which was designed to do that. It was to try to introduce Western ideas into the Middle East. I got involved. The head of it back then was a young woman named Liz Cheney, and Liz, and that's how I got to know her as the head of MEPI. I was involved in a project to translate into Arabic the Federalist Papers, the Declaration of Independence, Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Beautiful translations. I don't know if they just ever got out of the basement of various American embassies and consulates throughout the Middle East. But it was at least people understood that this is a war, maybe on the first instance with bombs and bullets, but at the end of the day, it's a war of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to sell the idea of the West to people who right now not just reject it, but seek its destruction. Not an easy task. And it's much harder if you don't recognize that you have something you have to do. You have to get into the trenches. It's the
Along
trenches
those
of ideas.
lines, you've been very outspoken over the years of how several administrations have got it really wrong with Iran. And that we have kicked the can down the road and we fed the beast and made a lot of mistakes along the way. And it's one of the reasons we're where we are here.
Well, like Iran, no one is actually standing up to Iran. And I say, I would say that we are deeply grateful for the defensive assistance which the United States lent us several weeks ago when we were the targets of an totally unprecedented, game-changing assault by 350 Iranian projectiles, including cruise missiles that could take out an entire neighborhood, not just could have killed thousands of people, and we were grateful for that. But while America is aiding us on the defense, no one's going on the offense against Iran. And so the Iranians can attack American bases in Iraq, Syria, and Jordan over 170 times. This is pro-Iranian militias who act on the behest of Iran. Same thing is true with the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who are closing international shipping through one of the most important shipping lanes. Nobody has extracted any price from Iran itself. I thought, remember a couple of months ago when tragically those 3 American service people were killed in Jordan by an pro-Iranian militia. I thought maybe the United States would maybe just destroy this factory that made the drone in Iran. And that would be a blow not just to Iran, but also to Russia and Ukraine, because Russia's using those drones to kill Ukrainians. But no, nobody has touched a hair on an Iranian head, except for Israel. And which is one of the reasons I think that the Arab states want to make peace with us. They want to make peace with us not because they love us, but because we're strong. And that's the message has been, for Iran that there's no price to pay. And the hope, and I think it was an earnest hope of the Obama administration, that Iran, through the nuclear deal, could be transformed into what was called a responsible regional power, has been completely overthrown. Iran has greatly expanded its support for terror. It's the largest state sponsor of terror in the world. It has taken over huge swaths of the Middle East, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, almost an unbroken arc of Iranian influence from Tehran to Beirut in a very short period of time, in a few years, with the backing, both financial and diplomatic, of the Iran nuclear deal. But nobody will stand up to them. On the contrary, measures were taken to ignore repeated Iranian aggressions and provocations, including an attempt to assassinate me when I was ambassador in Washington, along with the Saudi ambassador, including a very penetrating investigation of the Iranian and Hezbollah drug rings in the United States, a vast enterprise. With that investigation was simply stopped. They stopped investigating. And Hezbollah is deeply engaged in the drug trade, along with the Al-Quds division of Iran. So the message was that almost anything could be done in order to achieve reconciliation with Iran. And the big question now is there anybody in the administration on Capitol Hill who's willing to stand up and say, listen, we tried. It didn't succeed. We gave it our best effort. And now we're going to have to move. We have to do a 180-degree pivot from reconciliation to confrontation, to opposition. The administration is offering, I'm getting this mostly from Tom Friedman, is offering in return for Israel's showing restraint and not going into Rafah, is offering, among other inducements, a Saudi-Israeli peace agreement, inter-Arab force to take over the keys of Gaza from Israel, but also a regional defense pact against Iran, which looks very good on paper. But would you get behind a power that up to this point is never willing to take on Iran, even almost in a symbolic way? Is that defensive alliance going to have teeth? Is the United States willing to say, okay, if Iran attacks you, we're going to attack Iran. We're not just going to defend you passively. We're going to exact a price from Iran and actually deter it. I think without that, that regional notion can't succeed.
I'm going to let you go in 2 minutes. Just two last questions. You recently wrote an interesting piece about don't read into it that I'm pro-Biden, don't read into it that I'm pro-Trump.
Oh, God, it's
But
impossible.
if I was listening to you today,
Yeah.
I would say you think Trump is the right solution as far as Israel goes. I mean, I'm a tremendous
I'll say that I
anti-Trumper.
don't.
So
Let me say this. First of all, as you know, I worked very closely with Joe Biden, with his staff, with Tony
yes,
Blinken, with Jake Sullivan, and I'm very fond of these people. And I know they have Israel in their hearts. I know they face political constraints. I know that they have worldviews that don't always set with our worldviews. I get it, believe me. But I can never question their commitment to Israel's security and to the U.S.-Israel relationship. And I have strong objections to some of their policies, of course, not to all of them. And just what was it? Just over a week ago, the United States vetoed a UN resolution that would have unilaterally created a Palestinian state and posed a difficult, very difficult situation for us.
and gave
They
them
passed
$30
a
billion
bill
in
of
aid.
$26 billion in aid.
Yeah.
I mean, really?
Yeah.
How do you overlook all
That's
that?
what I say to people every time they go, Biden's shitty for Israel. He just signed a check for $30 billion. Look at what he's doing.
Really,
Forget some of the things he's saying. Yeah.
Right now, the International Criminal Court is trying to criminalize our leaders, and the United States is going to block that. It's going to block it. Yes, so I'm going to have objections to policy, but I have a much broader vision of these things. The Democratic Party, moreover, is a party of many voices, and there are debates in that party. The Republican Party is a party of one voice. And yes, we have great friends in the Republican Party, but if the head of that party, that one voice, takes a different position toward us, I think everyone's going to line behind that person. And up to now, if you ask me what Donald Trump's policies are toward us, I have actually no idea. He said things that are very critical of Israel. She says things that are critical of Biden. But I don't see any specific policy recommendation that I could say is pro or advantageous or disadvantageous to Israel. I just don't know. The same question. It's a very frequently asked question. I don't mean to demean in any way, Donnie, but it was just asked. I was just on the BBC about an hour ago, and they asked me exactly the same question.
All right, so I'm with the BBC.
I'm
okay, right?
I don't know. Do you know? Does anybody know? Can anybody tell me?
Here's what I know.
Here's
what I know. Here's where I come out. That as a Jew,
yes.
I know historically what can happen when a unhinged fascist takes over, and so that's where I begin, middle, and end my story when it comes to Donald Trump.
And
so
I don't take issue with that. I don't take issue with that. There are dangers all around. Nobody knows, And from my perspective, I always prefer to deal with what I know, with the known. It's much easier. Our period with Obama was a very tough period. That's where I don't know where you got yours, but this is where I got my gray hair, and it was a tough period.
Yes, very much so.
I almost never had a moment where I didn't anticipate. I have no profit. I didn't anticipate what the Obama administration was going to do because I knew what his worldview was.
Yeah.
I knew what his policies were. I knew where he stood on issues. And that was a huge advantage for me as an ambassador to know these things. Now, I would, call up the prime minister and say, this is what he's going to do next Tuesday. Watch this.
Yeah.
A couple of times I missed it, but only a couple of times over 5 years. There's an advantage of that. And I'll tell you, I just don't know.
Last question. Give me one reason to be optimistic. I know it's very dark right now. You've seen a lot of twists and turns. There's nobody that kind of doesn't understand the nuances more than you. We're in obviously very kind of treacherous times right now. Final thought, a reason to be optimistic of what's going to happen in the future.
I'm fundamentally optimistic. I'm also a believer, but I'm fundamentally optimistic. Israel's going to win the war. It's going to go back and examine ourselves. It's one of the great advantages we have as a society that we are self-critical, often to a fault, but as far as I know, nobody resigned after Pearl Harbor, and nobody resigned after 9/11. That doesn't happen here. Mm-hmm. We are that self-critical. The buck really ends in many places here, and that's good. And we will learn from our mistakes. But I think the greatest source of optimism is the character of Israeli society that was revealed after October 7th, where 80% of the Israelis went out and volunteered in some way, whether they picked fruit or took in refugees or made meals for soldiers. 360,000 Israelis, young people mostly, left their homes, left their families, left their work to go out and fight for their country, knowing full well that they could give their lives to their country, they could give their health and body to their country. 360,000 Israelis is proportionally the equivalent of about 20 million Americans. That's more Americans than fought all of World War II. All of World War II. What country on earth has such a thing? Who's willing to do that in Belgium? Who's willing to do that in, Spain, in Italy? It doesn't exist anywhere on this planet. And, we've just celebrated Passover, a story of survival. And yes, they try to kill us. And yes, we ate. Okay, entirely too much.
That's a good way to end it.
I hate matzah. I just do. I have a tiny piece the first night. But in that service, we remind ourselves that in every generation, there are enemies who come up to try to destroy us. In every generation, it's hard, but we survive. And it's the resilience and unity that's hard baked into the Jewish people that enables us to survive this. Keep in mind, this country was created on May 14th, 1948, 3 years almost to the date after the end of the Holocaust. What people in history does such a thing? And then fights off 5 Arab armies trying to destroy it, right? With nothing, right? With seltzer bottles. We are one tough people. We just
I'm going to end on that note. Ambassador Oren, what a pleasure talking to you. Most recent book is Israel 2048, the Rejuvenated State. You are a gentleman and a scholar. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you so much, son. Real pleasure.
Everybody, thanks for watching. If you like it, hit that subscribe button. And we love having you here watching On Brand. And just don't miss any future episodes. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.